Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS in.form. We're very fortunate to have in the studio once again Senator Mark Messmer representing District 48. And he is here. He comes in every Friday when legislation is going on. Well, the legislation has now ended and he is in to do a show today, and he'll be doing a show again next week on Friday to recap what has happened in legislation. So this is part one. We're going to cover some of the bills that have gone through. Next week, Friday, the same time, we will cover some other bills. Senator, welcome to the show.
Great to be here again. We wrapped up last night about 8:30 in the Senate and about 9:30 in the House, and all done. We were scheduled, the latest we could have gone was Monday. Well, we knew we'd not go, have to come back next Monday, so we were going to shoot for Friday. Well, then the Big Ten tourney reality came into play, and tonight, or Thursday night, I guess, hotel availability
was nil.
Gone.
Yeah.
So the legislators who didn't have a hotel or who stayed in hotels had to get out. So we pushed everything back another day and wrapped up Thursday evening.
And you've got a lot of good bills. This has been a good bill that has has gone through. But not all bills went through.
Yeah, well, short session, you tend to have a lot of them just not, some of them you just run out of committee time. With the condensed conference committee schedule we had, there was bills that were trying to be negotiated that just couldn't come up with a compromise language from House and Senate versions. So there was a few that just fell into the scrap heap from the normal conference committee process. But all in all, for a short session, we got a lot of really good stuff done.
Well, one of the good things I'm sure that makes the county and municipal governments very happy is the roads funding that has gone through.
Pretty big influx of money, some this year, some over the next 2 years. Between the House Bill 1001 and Senate Bill 67, there will be $1 billion of additional money to state and local government for road work. We normally spend, between state and local funding, $2 billion a year gets allocated to roads currently. So it's not chump change that we're already spending for local and state spending, but we're going to throw on top of the $2 billion this year and next year another $1 billion of money that some will go to the locals directly from Senate Bill 67. That's a $430 million distribution of local option income taxes. They have a reserve fund that they maintain in case there's dips in their income from year to year to keep that paid back to counties. And of that, Du Bois County will get a little over $2 million, and then the cities in the county will get about $2.3 million. Jasper gets about half of that, and the other cities and towns in the county will get the other portion of that. But 75% of that money that's allocated from Senate Bill 67 has to be committed to roads, either this year or set it back in a reserve fund for future road work. The other 25% they can spend how they want. They could spend it all on roads if they want, but at least 75% of that needs to be committed to roads. And that was one portion of funding that I was pretty certain was going to go through. The only difference when we passed it in the Senate, it had the 75-25, requirement. When they worked on it in the House, they pulled that requirement off and said that it was just going to go to the locals and they could spend how they want. Well, everybody's been clamoring for more road money, and deservedly so. There's plenty of catch-up we need to do still on road maintenance and bridge maintenance. Dozens of bridges across the county that need some work, and just the funding is just the holdup. So statewide, in all the communities in my district, there's going to be a good shot of money coming from that. There will be another $582 million coming to some to states and some to locals of that from House Bill 1001, and that uses a portion of a little more. We're going to raise the percentage of sales tax on fuel that we commit to roads and have a distribution of some reserve funds that the state had and part of the Major Moves 2020 Trust Fund. But of that, $328 million of that will go to the INDOT, and $254 million over the next 2 years through their normal road fund allocation will get sent to the locals, and that gets distributed to cities and counties and towns based on percentage of population.
And that's the road funding for money that existed now, right? But then there also was a bill for money to exist in the future, or is that the second part?
It's all, yeah, that's the House Bill 1001. Okay. That's basically, we were thought about trying to fund it up over the next 4 years. but we decided we wanted to keep the governor's feet to the fire to help be cooperative in, the long-term strategy. We can't just rely on, the excise tax on fuel as the sole long-term strategy. With raising mileage standards from the federal government, they keep pushing the mileage rates up and up and up, and so consumption, for 12 years has been trending down on gallons consumed year after year. And looking out in the future, we've got to look at some other ways to fund the long. I mean, that'll always be part of it, but it can't be, as that fuel consumption continues to go down. Even if you get that to where you can stabilize it, you've got to look at some other mechanisms. So we wanted to make sure he was eagerly participating in our long-term strategy, and not fund him up for 4 years and then have that be, off the list. So,
and this has to there was talk about $1 tax on cigarettes
right.
to help raise some funds. That's
gone.
done
Yeah.
because this bill has passed the way it did, and so okay.
Yep, there was a talk about raising the excise tax on fuel, 4 cents, and $1 a pack on cigarettes. That's all off the table. I mean, for the next 2 years, we didn't need to raise any taxes. We had enough reserves on hand. We had the Medicaid spending this past year was $200 million, less than we anticipated. I mean, that's billions of dollars of our annual budget. That was a savings that we were able to allocate money that we knew we already had available the next 2 years. So nothing we need to do short term, but long term we need to plan for. And the rest of it will happen in the budget cycle next year.
Okay, so yeah, we'll be looking at road funding again,
Yep.
but in a different way, I guess. Also, a bill was passed for property tax relief.
Finally, we've been talking about this probably for 4 years that I can remember. With changing crop prices in years past, our formula for calculating the farm property assessment, it's not all other property taxes are based on their resale value or their commercial, their appraised value. But farm property, we used to just have a flat assessment, and then the court said, now you got to have some way to justify that. So they came up with a formula that calculated in crop prices and fuel expenses and the long-term capital costs for farmers, and came up with a way to try to calculate a number. Well, for the last couple of years, farm prices have been back to normal, but for 3 or 4 years prior, there was a huge spike in crop prices. Well, now that's gone away, and the impact of those, was set to drive farm assessment prices up about another $1,000 an acre over the next few years, at a time when incomes are tailing off. So we rewrote the formula this year. That was all part of Senate Bill 308, and it'll keep the assessed value where it's at this year the same. Next year it'll drop about $20 an acre. The next year it'll drop about another $100 an acre. So what we did was we had a 4-year lag in the formula, which I don't know why they went that far back. We shortened that lag time up to 2 years, and then as part of the formula you can take off a high year and a low year. And then they changed the capitalization rate. They raised it up to be more reflective of, of farmers' cost of doing business. With all that included, instead of having an assessed value that was going to just continue to skyrocket up, and once those high years fell off, it would have dropped like a rock.
Okay.
Basically, as we recalculated it, it'll just put it on a steady decline, down to where it would have been in 5 or 6 years, but on more of a steady trend that way, instead of a big spike and then a huge drop within a couple years' time.
And this has to do with agricultural property.
Farm property,
Okay.
just strictly the fields that have corn, soybeans, wheat. I mean, strictly that property. Doesn't apply to any other type of property.
Okay. And a bill has been passed to support veterans.
Yes, it was the Military Relief Fund. We set that up, I think, in 2006 for the 9/11 and newer veterans. They could apply to that fund for emergency money for food, for clothes, for whatever emergency needs the veteran needed, they could go apply to that fund to get some emergency money, pay utility bills, whatever. But this bill this year, we applied that to all veterans, and that fund is primarily supported by donations from the public, and there's been enough support to that they're going to open it up to anybody who's served as a veteran, which is going to be a huge boost to the veterans across the state. So one more way we looked at, how can we continue to increase our support to veterans, and that was a great shot in the arm.
Body cams that police wear, that bill has gone through too.
Yep, House Bill 1019 that was authored by Representative Mahan and worked on with Senator Bray on the Senate side, and came to a pretty good consensus bill that dealt with privacy issues and what type of information to scramble if you have to have to release footage. It opened up clarity on when they could keep it from being disclosed, and if it was going to be kept from being released to the public, that family members or either the person involved or their family members could see access to it regardless of whether it was going to be released to the public. Gives the media an opportunity to see it, and so if law enforcement is going to keep it from being released to the public for fear it might cause problems with the ongoing investigation, they have to prove to a judge why they need to keep it from being released. But a bill that really, they had several committee hearings in the fall on study committees, and started in the House that the families or media had to prove why they needed to see it. Well, if you don't know what's in it,
how do you know?
How do you know? And then that really kind of put the burden of proof, on the wrong party. And when we had it on the Senate side, we changed that and had nearly unanimous approval in the House and Senate. So a good bill, just for transparency. We want to make we have great law enforcement across the state. We have great law enforcement officers, but occasionally things go wrong. The use of body cams is not mandated. It's optional for all levels of law enforcement to use or not use. We don't mandate it. But if they're going to have it, rules to follow on how long they maintain access to the records, and if there's a court case involved, when they have to maintain it for the entirety of the court proceedings, and so there's just good rules around in place to make sure folks get treated properly and the information is available to the public.
Now, these are all bills we've talked about that get a lot of publicity, and there are other bills that get a lot of publicity, some of which we'll talk about next week. But there are bills that you've worked on that have been passed that not a lot of people talk about, but they're good, important bills.
Yep.
The deer
hunting
farms, if
preserves,
that's deer preserves,
Yep.
and
that got passed and by pretty wide margins in the House and Senate. I checked yesterday to see if it's been sent to the governor yet. A lot of those, when they get circulated for signatures, once the governor gets them, he's got 7 days to sign them. But that had some good fixes for DNR in it as well, on when they had a lawsuit dealing with the deer preserve issue that had kind of been in the courts for 8 or 10 years. They had some of their own authority put at jeopardy, so I was able to fix their problems and then address regulations of folks that have the deer preserves, of disease prevention, of food safety issues, of just proper operation. So that was good to get that one resolved. There was one I had dealing with being on the Public Policy Committee, one that dealt with packaged liquor stores and in-state residency requirements. Some out-of-state large retailers were trying to bypass loopholes in our laws, so we tightened that up. Then I had Senate Bill 324 that requires some mandated turnaround times for the Department of Health on commercial projects that go to the state for either commercial septic systems, or if you have a daycare center or campground, or things that go through health department review above and beyond the normal structural integrity portions of it. So mandated quicker turnaround time, allowed for quicker processing of appeals on code reviews, and just a good streamlining bill. And sometimes the Homeland Security can delegate plan review down to the bigger cities. They can get approved to do their own plan review process and steps to help make that happen quicker, and who's going to have responsibility, and how the money's going to get, one fee, whether it goes to state or local folks. So just a good streamlining of government and government efficiency. Very happy with that one. And then Senate Bill 325 was the individual development accounts that we talked about a few weeks back, that allows low-income families to save for, currently they could do a home, small business, or college expenses, and we added purchase of a vehicle to that. So,
and that makes sense because you can't really get a job or hold down a job without transportation.
Yeah.
So you just kind of keep holding them in that poverty level unless you can get them to move up.
Right.
How many bills were passed this year? Do you know
Around
that number?
around 100.
Wow, that is a lot.
Yeah.
And we've only probably talked about a handful of those,
Yeah.
and really, in the state, I think probably 4 of them are the ones that get the publicity, but there's a lot of others that have been passed.
And a lot of them are just technical updates to every division of, whether it's BMV, whether it's Department of Financial Institutions, the insurance agents. I mean, all of the regulatory agencies every year have cleanup language that they have to update just to keep in compliance with federal laws, with changing products that come in the market. How do you, one we dealt with this year was, they call it not lawsuit lending, but if folks are in the middle of a lawsuit, there's companies out there that loan them money, while they're waiting for their suit to get settled, and no regulations on that ever, and finally got that passed. And I know we've worked on that 6 years in a row, and could never get a bill put together that treated the consumer with enough protections, but wasn't so restrictive that it put the practice out of business. So it was finally a delicate balance of 6 years of work that one came to fruition this year. So a lot of little things that most people don't care about, don't hear about, but
are important.
Yeah, are important.
Well, next week we've got more issues to talk about, and we'll talk about legislation that happened this year, which, by the way, yesterday was the last day. It's good to have you back in town doing your regular job at Messmer Mechanical.
Good to be home.
Good to be home. Senator, thank you for coming in, and we'll talk to you next Friday, and we'll talk again about legislation that has happened in this year's legislature. Thank you for watching WJTS Inform. Thanks to Senator Mark Messmer. We are local people watching local people.